Thank you everyone for joining us. We really appreciate carving out your time in your day to join Monster's webinar on the 2021 Outlook, the future of work. We understand that time is even more difficult today as we're all trying our best to balance, but we do really appreciate that you're joining us. If for whatever reason you need to drop early, no worries at all. We'll be sending out a recording of this webinar as well as our full special report tomorrow. So again, thank you. So as we say goodbye to one of the most challenging years on record, the big question is, and it's why all of you have joined us, is what will 2021 look like? Will hiring get back to normal? And what should recruiters and talent acquisition professionals focus on to rebuild their workforce? Well, I'm not going to say that we can predict the future. I don't know if anybody quite can, but over the next 60 minutes, we'll do our best to answer these questions by sharing the results of Monster's biggest global survey of the year. I'm Megan Goulet. I am the Marketing Director at Monster Worldwide, and I am thrilled to introduce our host today. We have Monster's own Scott Bloomsack, the SVP and Global Head of Corporate and Market Strategy, and Jort Wassenaar, the SVP and General Manager of Europe. Quick bios on both, and then we'll jump right in. Scott joined Monster in 2017 following the acquisition of Monster by Randstad, the global staffing and HR services firm. At Monster, Scott oversees the development of key strategic initiatives and responsibilities for SEO and marketing analytics. Jort joined Monster in 2019 from Randstad, in which he was advising global clients on their talent acquisition strategy. At Monster, Jort is responsible for the European operation and delivering the right talent to Monster's clients and oversees teams in Europe's main markets. So just a heads up as to what we're going to expect today over the next 60 minutes. We will have a brief overview of our data as well as then transfer over to our panel of data experts, and they will be doing a much deeper dive into our research findings. Of course, we'll try to save about 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the webinar for Q&A. So let's jump right in. There is no downplaying the fact that the coronavirus pandemic has had an impact on the world of work, from the tools as well as the methods that employers use to hire and train candidates, to new policies around new work, to flexibility, to a refined concept as to what it actually means to find the right fit between candidates and employers. So Scott, I would love to start with you. Could you please give us a little bit of a glimpse as to what we can expect for this year?
Sure, Megan, and thanks to everybody for taking the time to join us today. In terms of what we can expect in 2021, despite the lingering uncertainty and fluctuating in the jobs market, we do have some good news. The 2021 hiring outlook is positive. Of the 82% of employers who plan to hire this year, 47% say it's to replace or backfill staff, while 35% plan to hire for new positions. What's more, 9 in 10 recruiters say they're confident that they can find the right candidate. In addition, what we're also expecting is DE&I to play a major role in finding the right fit. We found that 45% of candidates saying that companies' diversion and inclusion efforts and learning about them is going to be key for them in 2021. And employers are listening. Almost half of employers have updated or are working to update their recruitment strategies to attract more diverse talent.
That's great. And that sounds really, really positive news. What I love hearing about that is that communication, because that's so much of what we're going to expect this year, right? Is that change of expectations. Do you have any insights as to how those expectations might have changed, and especially what the right fit now looks like?
Yeah, I mean, one trend I think that we'll see more of in 2021, which I think we can all expect and understand, is this idea of flexibility and work-life balance continuing to be a major theme. This whole excuse of not allowing employees to work from home because they're worried about productivity, that's really been disproved, I think, once and for all in 2020. I think all of us, having worked from home now for going on a year, have learned that we can be productive at home. And it's hard to see how companies are going to be able to just simply roll back all the flexible ways of working that they've introduced during the pandemic, particularly if it makes it harder for people to manage both the demands of work and family. So I think what we'll see is sort of more flexibility. I don't expect employers to go 100% back to full office working. Probably they all won't go back to 100% pure remote, but really having that balance to allow employees to work when and how they want is going to be a key theme in 2021.
Yeah, I agree to that, Scott. But I also think that employers will have higher expectations about candidate skills. What you see is that 87% said that they really struggle to fill positions, and this is all a result of the skill gap. And also from the research, we see that 1/3 of the employers they really agree that the skill gap will increase, and especially compared to a year ago, and especially in the UK, Sweden, we see this happening, but also in the US.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Globally, 59% of employers are primarily looking for a resume to demonstrate a candidate's skills, but then also more than half agree that they want a resume to convey more of the applicant's personality. So it's an interesting balance of the two. York, can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, I think it has very much to do with virtual recruiting. So we anticipate that also will be one of the major challenges in 21. And we see that also coming back from the research. One of the 10 respondents said their companies are now fully virtual. So 1 out of 10. And both on the employers and candidates, they all agreed that virtual recruitment makes it harder to tell if a cultural and a value that they align with what they want to see. And you see that also the culture part also comes back in the southern part of Europe, for example. You see that within France has the highest rate of candidates that saying virtual hiring makes it tough to assess a company's culture. And that's also, it sits in the culture. They want to have more proximity and understanding of what is a company like. And so it's also to understand companies better. Monster also started, for example, last year with the first time like a real virtual job fair. It was based on chats, but you saw that there were already some great connection to get a better feeling about companies. And what we also see is from the employer side, also in the interviews, they really look at the presence of candidates in the interview that will determine if they hire a candidate. So if you have like a spotty Wi-Fi that we all recognize, I would say in all our virtual meetings, there's always somebody in there who has a challenge. But if this happens in an interview, you can be the greatest candidate, but it will not. They will make a judgment on your presence and that you don't have that in play, that the right Wi-Fi in place. So I think this is really these are elements that really show that it will be continue to be a major challenge also in 21 and beyond.
Completely agree. Thank you so much, Yor, and thank you, Scott, as well. So you just shared a lot of great data. I know we kind of kept your slide up, but we have a lot to go through. So let's pivot right to our panelists, and they can guide us through all that different research that we have, as well as some additional topics that we explored in our survey.
Hey everyone, I'm Jewel Lascano, Head of Research and Insights at Monster. We're excited to share with you insights on the future of work. And to get us grounded, I'll give you a quick snapshot of our methodology. At the end of last year, we fielded a survey among over 3,000 recruiters and employers across 8 countries in North America and Europe, and made sure to get a representative sample by key segments like company size, generation, and gender. We also looked at functional area, industry, and the type of positions they primarily hire. And throughout the findings, you'll also see highlights of data from candidates and employees that we leveraged to complement the recruiter findings. And these were gathered from a survey of over 7,000 respondents that we fielded in the same markets at the end of last year. Now, jumping right into the general outlook. As you've heard, we're happy to report that the 2021 hiring outlook is positive, with 82% of employers across the globe saying they plan on hiring this year. Almost half say they plan to replace or backfill jobs, and about a third plan to hire net new positions. Key industries that are refilling lost jobs include healthcare, finance and banking, and real estate. And meanwhile, tech is leading the way in adding net new jobs. About half of those hiring for white-collar roles are replacing lost jobs, while we're seeing expanded hiring opportunities of net new roles among blue-collar and gray-collar positions. So blue collar roles are those working in physical labor or a skilled trade, and gray collar roles are those working in a non-office setting and requiring interaction with the public on a regular basis, like teachers or hospital workers. So there's positivity in seeing expansion in plans to hire frontline type of worker roles. On the flip side, some segments aren't as optimistic and more likely to anticipate a hiring freeze. Not surprising, these are segments and industries harder hit by the pandemic, including small businesses, retail, and leisure and hospitality. Global confidence in finding the right candidate is down a notch compared to last year, but it's still pretty high. Confidence is highest among segments looking to grow in 2021, like tech, finance and banking, and larger companies. And then more specifically in the US, recruiters show even greater optimism, saying that they're very confident in finding the right candidate. Having higher confidence in finding the right candidates doesn't come without its challenges. The top anticipated challenges for the year are finding candidates with the right skills, managing work-life balance expectations, and virtual recruiting. When we look at it by segment, small businesses, as well as those hiring blue-collar roles, are more likely to grapple with unrealistic salary expectations. Healthcare, with all the pandemic challenges that it's faced thus far, also anticipates being challenged with balancing empathy and professionalism during the hiring process, as well as ensuring an updated candidate pool. And then finance and banking recruiters recognize more than other industries that competition for talent will be a challenge in 2021. Speaking of challenges, let's now take a look at how the pandemic has impacted and is shaping our way of work. Globally, 37% of recruiters say that the HR and recruiting industry has managed well throughout the pandemic. And flexibility tops the list of policy changes caused by the pandemic, with 42% of global employers offering flexible work schedules as a result. Other policy changes include remote flexibility, health policies and protocol, training staff and skills training, increased security, team collaboration, and reducing the workplace footprint. And then it gets more interesting when we look at it by segment, with certain business sizes narrowing in on specific policy changes, like larger companies shifting to remote flexibility, offering employee assistance programs, and reducing their workplace footprint. Mid-sized companies are focused on salary protection, paid family leave, and paid volunteering days. And then small businesses are more likely to say they haven't made any changes at all. Those hiring for gray collar roles, those positions that have regular interaction with the public and are exposed to the pandemic, more so than others who work remotely, have increased training, staff, and skills training. And we also heard what employees want. The top 3 changes employees want are flexible work schedules, salary protection, and health policies and protocols. And there's an opportunity for employers to close the gap in a few areas where employees want change, but where employers aren't yet making as big of a shift. And these areas include salary protection, communication transparency, and career development. We also took a look at the impact of work on mental health, and a little less than half, so 46% of employees surveyed said that they've experienced some sort of job-related anxiety and/or stress and depression. And globally, women are experiencing the physical and emotional toll of work more than men. So across all countries, and especially in Italy, women are experiencing higher rates of anxiety. Headaches, depression, and loneliness are more common among women as well. And then meanwhile, men report higher rates of alcohol use as a result of work-related stress, especially in the US, Canada, Germany, France, and Sweden. And now we're going to shift gears a bit, and I'll hand it over to Carl to share with you insights on virtual recruiting.
Thanks, Jewel. I'm Carl Drummond. I'm the manager of B2C content and PR for Monster, and I was part of the team that fielded these surveys and analyzed the data. And as a result of the work from home mandates, virtual recruiting and onboarding accelerated across the globe, particularly in North America and the UK. And as Jort mentioned earlier, despite the increase in virtual recruiting, there are still some hurdles to overcome, including difficulty in assessing fit. And this is both from a hiring and a candidate perspective. Next slide. So to understand this better, we surveyed recruiters to determine to what extent they have used virtual hiring tools and asked them what percentage of their hiring was done virtually. And the results, a clear majority, 70% of recruiters told us that at least half of their hiring and onboarding was done virtually. Most of that was driven by tech and finance, which had 96% of recruiters doing at least 1/4 or more of their hiring and onboarding virtually. Whereas leisure and hospitality was almost the flip side of that equation, with 20% of recruiters saying they did no virtual hiring. And that was followed closely by retail, with 19% not hiring virtually. So what's holding people back from embracing virtual hiring even more? One of the biggest obstacles is being able to assess cultural fit. And we heard this from both sides. Candidates and employers are both struggling with determining fit through virtual tools. In fact, 75% of candidates agreed with the statement, virtual hiring makes it difficult to really assess how a company's values and culture align with my own. And you can see by the stats on this slide that this is a global issue. A majority of candidates in France think virtual recruiting makes it hard to determine fit. And Sweden had the highest rate of employers agreeing that it's difficult to assess fit at 65%. So what does this mean for assessing fit overall, and how does it impact the hiring process? When we asked recruiters what tools are the best for determining fit, we found they rely on traditional tools like interviews, resumes, and prior work experience. I want to point out that we specifically asked about in-person interviews, despite most in-person interactions having been curtailed due to the pandemic, and found that it's still the preferred method for finding the right fit. Along with virtual hiring, we wanted to find out how the pandemic was impacting the way recruiters evaluated candidates. Specifically, which candidate traits don't necessarily raise a red flag like they used to. In other words, what are you willing to overlook or forgive? Not surprisingly, job hopping doesn't have the same stigma it used to, considering the stats we've been reading about for a few years now about younger workers having 17 jobs and 5 career changes in their lifetime. This is not a big surprise. Gaps on a resume is not as big of an issue as it used to be either. And considering the current rate of unemployment, we'll be seeing quite a few candidates return to the job market with gaps on their resume. What will be of interest to us all as we come out of the pandemic and ramp up hiring will be how candidates explain that gap and demonstrate what they were doing during that time. And just a little aside, as the editor of the Career Advice blog, this will be an important point for me to address with candidates throughout the year. So of particular interest here was identifying the industries most open to new grads with little work experience. We saw this in industries ranging from healthcare to leisure, hospitality, and business services. And that got us thinking about what makes a new grad stand out. When specifically asked, how can a first-time job seeker stand out from the crowd, the majority stressed interview presence, followed by internships, work experience, and rounding out the top 3 brings us back to cultural fit. Of course, these factors vary by sector, with healthcare strongly preferring interview presence and experience, and more than a third of manufacturing recruiters ranking tech skills as important. And just as this differs by sector, it also varies by generation of the recruiter. Although there isn't much disparity between the cohorts when it comes to interview performance, the differences between the generations gets wider when leadership or work experience are factored in. This is something to keep in mind as younger workers enter the talent acquisition industry. How will that impact the way candidates are evaluated? As we researched more about finding the right fit, it was revealing how, even though it ranked as one of the most effective tools, the resume is a sticking point in the hiring process. There's a clear difference between what employers are hoping to learn from a candidate's resume and what an applicant is hoping to convey. With nearly 2/3 of recruiters looking for skills on a resume and nearly 40% of candidates prioritizing their values, there's a clear disconnect between the role of the resume. That disconnect makes it clear why employers are relying more heavily on the interview presence versus the resume to determine a candidate's fit. Add to that the clear sense that candidates are not always presenting themselves honestly. A clear majority of employers say the candidates exaggerate their skills on their resume, and almost half think candidates are stretching the truth. How does this apprehension about honesty and skills sets play into the ongoing struggle to find qualified candidates with the necessary skills? to dig into that, I'm going to turn this over to Julia, who's going to explore what we discovered about the skills gap.
Thank you so much, Carl and Jewel. And my name's Julia Gaynor, and I manage the B2B content, and I'm also part of the team that was responsible for putting together this report. So we'll start here with the skills gap. And while we learned earlier, we just learned that employers continue to struggle with being able to accurately assess candidates based on resumes and other inputs. One of the biggest challenges that I'm sure many of you on this webinar are facing persists is the skills gap. And we learned that it actually is growing. As reported earlier, I think it might have been Yort who said this, the #1 challenge for employers is finding candidates with the right skills. I mean, that's what employers told us this year. And nearly a third said that the gap has actually grown compared to a year ago. The sectors that struggle to fill the most positions because of a lack of qualified candidates with the right skills are finance, real estate, and tech, according to our data. But when it comes to actually closing the gaps, what employers told us they would like, 2/3 of them, is for candidates to do a better job articulating their skills, especially transferable skills. The employers also said, though, that one of the hardest parts of their jobs for people in talent and acquisition space is writing honest and compelling job descriptions. So it clearly goes both ways. Finding the right fit depends on both candidates and employers being clear about what they're looking for and what they can bring to the table. So a lot about this communication and transparency. And when it comes to making sure candidates have the skills they need, our data shows that both agree it's a shared responsibility between candidates and employers, with perhaps a little bit more onus on the employer. In fact, for workers with less than a high school or just a high school degree, that group is the one that most thinks that the responsibility should be on the employer to train and upskill workers to fill those gaps. So in terms of top skills, things have changed over the last decade for sure. Research by McKinsey and others have shown that in the last 5 years, the top skills employers value most aren't necessarily STEM or tech related. And this is oftentimes because with the younger demographic, the candidates have those skills. But the soft skills, the human skills, are the ones that our employers are really looking for. And our data reflects the same. What we saw, and likely as a result of the pandemic, of the soft skills, and you can see this here, the #1 skill that is valued the most important, but also that employers said they find that there's a biggest gap in being able to fill, is dependability. And right now what basically this is saying is companies need workers who can show up when and where they're needed to get the job done. So now we're going to take a quick look at what tools and resources talent acquisition professionals told us around the globe that work best for them when trying to reach and engage candidates. Not surprisingly, phone and email remain the most effective communication tools overall. But if you drill down further, text recruiting is big with those making hires in the finance and banking sectors. And not surprisingly, probably for many of you on this webinar, for people recruiting blue collar workers, text recruiting is proving to be very effective for that demographic. When we asked about which online job board tools were most effective, which is clearly something that's important to us, resume search rose to the top. 40% of respondents globally cite the ability to parse resumes as an effective way to find the right fit. Text messaging, again, is one of the top 3 choices for SMBs. And video interviewing was a top choice for large businesses, which reinforces other data around virtual recruiting that we saw earlier. And finally, this year put renewed focus on diversity and inclusion around the globe. And we took a look at how the world's social justice movements have impacted diversity and inclusion efforts related to inclusive hiring practices. This is not something that's new, but certainly has been something that's been a greater focus over the last year. And the big takeaway from our research was that diversity and inclusion in hiring is important to candidates. In fact, 45% of candidates expect to learn about a company's diversity and inclusion efforts during the course of the hiring process, whether that's through employer branding, job descriptions, or the interview itself. Employers are taking notice, and 45% of them have also told us that they've either started to or have already updated their strategies, their recruitment strategies, in order to attract more diverse talent. But for all the good intentions, far less than half of global employers have a D&I strategy in place. And as you can see here, France, Italy, and the Netherlands had the highest percentage of respondents who told us they actually don't have a D&I strategy. Across the globe, if you look at where strategy is focused for companies that do have it, gender equity is the top focus across the globe, followed by age-related diversity and then ethnicity. In the US, the top three focuses are gender, race, and ethnicity. And in Germany, employers responded that their biggest focus was on age. And what's interesting is that while employers are prioritizing training, gender equity, and building a more diverse workforce, candidates told us when we asked them that they also want companies to focus on some other D&I initiatives. So if you're able to show that you're creating more inclusive workspaces, have diversity represented in your leadership, and have created some D&I employee resource groups, that could go a long way in showing candidates you're truly committed to inclusive hiring and set your company apart. You know, it's encouraging news to see so much focus on D&I, which is something our customers are definitely telling us they're prioritizing, and we hope to help more companies reach that diverse workforce that they're trying to attract. Meg, back to you.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. I'm so happy that we were able to get through all that information. We understand it's a lot, and we tried to do our best to go through it as quickly as possible. Just a reminder, we will be sending out a recording of this webinar as well as our full report. The majority of the slides that you saw today will be in the report. We also have some additional details in there that we did not include in this webinar. So feel free to check out that entire document when we send it over tomorrow. So I'm glad that we got a chance to stop. I want to make sure that we have time to answer some attendee questions. I've seen some already come in through the chat. Thank you all to also responding to our questions along the way. Love hearing your responses on how virtual recruiting has either been a positive or a negative in terms of trying to find that right fit, as well as how you've been experiencing the skills gap. Really some great information in there. Thank you all for participating. So as we have some time for questions to come in, again, please use that Q&A feature that's at the bottom of your screen. Scott, while we are waiting for the questions, would you mind just sharing your closing thoughts on this? Again, we had a lot of information today, but I really like to talk about how we're going to bring this into action. What is Monster going to be doing specifically to make enhancements on what we learned today?
Yeah, no, thanks, Megan. Really, in 2020, it was really all about us setting out to improve the technology to better connect jobs and people. And over the coming weeks, you'll see us start to launch that with a new refreshed candidate experience. And really, what we're trying to do is make data at the foundation of how candidates and employers really find the right fit. I think when you think about the data that we shared with you today, really fit is becoming a much more diverse set of components around really what people value. And we really want to make sure that that enters into the job search to ensure that candidates can express sort of who they are and what they're looking for. And same thing for the job, for the employers as well, to really leverage that information, those behaviors and those trends to really find the right fit between the two of them. And what you'll see, I think, as we go through 2021 is us launching more enhancements that really help to express that.
Great, thank you so much. All right, and you have actually given us enough time for some questions to come in, so that'll be great. Our first question is, this person is definitely part of the companies that are updating their D&I, and they want to let candidates know that we want to create more of a diverse workforce. How do you go about doing that without seeming like you're jumping on a bandwagon? Great question, especially with everything that's going on. Julia, do you want to take this one? Again, it's about updating their D&I without seeming like they're jumping on a bandwagon.
Absolutely. I can definitely take this because this is something that we focus on a lot here at Monster and in some of the content that we're creating to help our customers. So it really comes down to employer value proposition. And that's like a lot of our customers right now are reevaluating their employer value proposition, which is kind of like your mission statement as a talent acquisition provider, whether you're in the staffing space or whether you are, a direct employer. And it's looking at what is it that you are offering your employers, in return for what they're providing you, right, as a worker. And so a lot of our customers are choosing to reevaluate that through the lens of diversity and inclusion. And so kind of you have to look at your benefits and your, and your culture and who your ideal candidates are, and reevaluate that so that your kind of mission statement as an employer includes becoming more inclusive, right? And that's where you have to start, because I think, as we all know, you can't just simply change the images in your career site. It has to be something that is holistic and emanates from this employer value proposition. And then you can start adjusting the language in your career site, even the language in your job descriptions, and make sure that this kind of mission statement that you're creating is throughout every single touch point along the way, and that it's something that your company is living and breathing and is truly what you believe, and isn't just something that you're just kind of creating one day because it's the trend. And if you're able to do that, today's candidates, especially the younger ones, we've learned throughout all different types of research that we've done here, they are, they can see through a lot. They value transparency. So that's what I would say, start with that employer value proposition, and then kind of take a look at all of your candidate touch points to make sure that you're not just kind of, throwing something together because it feels like the right thing to do, but that you really believe that it is and that can be felt.
That's a great point, Julia. When we think about evaluating EVP and DEI, it's really a foundational company change, and a lot of how we refer to it is almost the same as when people were embracing digital transformation, right? It's more than just tech. It is a foundational change for how a company organizes, lives, breathes, etc. So thank you very much. EVP is a fantastic way to go for that. We have more questions that are coming in. Okay, here we go. With the potential of returning to physical offices later this year, do you think remote work and virtual hiring are still here to stay? Who wants to take this one?
I'll jump in and just say, at least from the conversations that I've had and sort of the data and the trends that I've seen, I think certainly some level of remote work is here to stay. I think a lot of the feedback you're hearing is this shift of the actual office place becoming more of a place where people meet and collaborate, and home offers that opportunity to actually do work. And I think with this sort of focus on flexibility, different employees are going to want different situations. Some will want to come into the office more, some will want to come into the office less. And what I think you'll see is not an abandonment of the traditional office setting, but have it be much more flexible to align to the needs of individual employees.
That's great. And this is actually a similar question that we have, not related to our data, but maybe we have some insights here. Have you heard of any creative ideas for employers whose office spaces are no longer being utilized to their maximum capacity? Many businesses are paying huge rent for space that is, in some cases, empty or at low capacity. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I can come up with all kinds of creative ideas. It also has to do with for how long. I think you already see initiatives where there is some hotel services that they are starting in some office building, or but since daycare and all these things are also on hold, and people it's only for the essential workers that they provide these services. It is hard to find really. There are always creative ideas, but it will not. What we see so far is that it's not bringing in the money that you're paying for your rent, so to say. So you could use this also to be creative and also work on your employer brand, so to say, to do something fun, that you invite people to the office where it is possible, so to say, and have your brand everywhere and use it that way instead of using it to make money. It's that it's a fun place to be at, but you don't see a lot of everyone is faced with this, so I think it's you don't see a lot of really opportunities to monetize on.
Yeah, and
I was going to also add, Meg, that I think what we've seen is offices transforming to adjust to the health and safety protocols and thinking about office space differently so that you can accommodate people and accommodate, I mean, there are also just tools and resources that people need that might be more expensive that you can't keep at home, right? So you need that office space, but being thoughtful about some of the other concerns that employees have around the, pandemic and challenges with healthcare and keeping space and distance, and thinking about how to design space that way and adjust what you have to meet those needs.
And I'm going to second that, Jewel, because, and it kind of goes back to what Scott was saying about flexibility. What we're hearing from the candidate side is definitely a willingness to get back into the workplace, but there's some caution, and they want to make sure that it's safe, it's clean, there are protocols being taken, there's social distancing. So all of that needs to be taken into account when we bring people back. But what they're looking for is that collaboration. So they really want to get back working with their coworkers. So I think that if you take that into consideration and think about the footprint of your workspace, how can you combine those two and then create a space that's safe and collaborative? I think that's a win-win across the board.
And kind of following up on that, there's a question that was asked around suggestions to attract blue collar workers. I saw this in the chat to the workplace, and a lot of us are faced with a labor pool. It says that they're able to collect unemployment benefits with additional government assistance, and doesn't have a lot of motivation to return to the workplace. And I think that making sure that you communicate, again, that you have a safe and healthy work environment is obviously key. But the other thing that we're learning, and that our data has shown, is that it goes back to the skills gap. And one thing that candidates really want is they want career growth as a part of their future. And also, as we all know, jobs are shifting, and by 2031, there may be jobs that don't even exist right now that will come into existence, in addition to the jobs that we have trouble skilling for now. And I think that what companies would be smart to do, and so many are, and a lot of our friends in the staffing space are doing this, is investing in upskilling and training now, and offering that to candidates and as an incentive to come back to work, so that they'll be better positioned for the future.
We can just keep on building off of each other, but I also want to add, related to the blue collar workers, is just remember that they want flexibility too, right? And so thinking about work hours, or offering childcare, or some of those needs that they need to maintain their lifestyle and work-life balance is really important as well. And that might be changing how you offer positions or benefits too.
That's great. So we have a lot of questions that are coming in around candidates. So let's kind of shift to that. Here's a great one. What are your thoughts on how recruiters and employers can overcome the technology gap that exists for many prospects who do not have access to technology, such as Zoom, etc.? Any thoughts on this one? Also, anyone who's experiencing this, please feel free to welcome and jump in on the chat as to what's worked for you as well. This is definitely going to be an issue for some candidates.
Yeah, just to play off of what Julie had commented on around the training and investing in increasing those skills, providing, I think you could almost have employee resource groups or kind of support groups to help make those adjustments, because it's not just like a flip of a switch where you just know the technology. I think we all face challenges with Zoom meetings and Teams and just all of the technology that we have to deal with, despite your age or your experience. So I think just, again, incorporating those other elements like flexibility, the training, and all of those things, having patience to get those elements up and running for people.
Yeah, I think also just going back to an old-fashioned phone call, right? Just at least in the beginning, let's go back to basics here. If there's technology gaps in terms of Zoom or virtual interviewing, just start with talking and build that rapport, and then you can determine based on location and the type of job and the company and the safety procedures, how do you continue that conversation to make sure that person's a right fit. But my first recommendation is pick up the phone and just start from there.
And that's interesting, because nowadays we're not calling anymore. Everything, you have to see somebody on screen nowadays for every meeting. So I think that's that's a very valid point.
Right, perfect. Here's a question, Carl. I'm not going to put you too much on the spot, but I think this might actually be a good one for you. Just thinking about how, with everything being more tech focused, attention spans being a little bit shorter here, do you think that affects job ads and how much detail in the length of a job ad to keep that attention of a candidate?
That's a really interesting question. And it's one of those things that we try to teach candidates how best to read a job ad so that you're not applying for jobs that aren't the right fit, you're not qualified for. One of the things that we tell them is look for the keywords. Understand what your keywords are for your skill set, what your dream job is or your ideal role. And that's what you're looking for. And so you're going to scan the job ad looking for that. So that's a note out to the employers that as long as you are defining that clearly, you're going to find the candidate who's already looking for that. So you're speaking their language. And so you're cutting down on that friction right there. So that's one key thing. And I think going back to what Julia was talking about D&I, a younger workers are looking for evidence and proof of that diversity, that commitment. So anything that's going to be within your job ad, if it's in your boilerplate or the description of your company, that's going to trigger it right there, and you're going to get the candidate that's most interested in you. You're going to find that cultural fit. So you're going to be able to play that in multiple places within the job ad where you're going to connect with the appropriate candidate.
And Megan, what we also see with Monster Studios is to have like a little movie in your job ad, especially for the younger generation. They really want to watch video, and this really gives a sneak peek into a company. So it's not a polished story about a company, but it's really you're gonna look at the work floor. What do they do, and you see the real people working, and that also we see also from the numbers that candidates stay way longer, and also after watching the movie really go through the details of the job ad. So I think that's also a great way to be more prominent, and I would also invite people to do that more and more, because if you look at YouTube, and if I look at my kids, for example, they are all over YouTube. So and they're only 8 and 10, so they're not looking for jobs, but it's clear that the younger generation wants to see more video.
Yep, that's a great point. And, so much with the change of video between, Monster Studios as well as our new Zoom and Teams meetings is this sense of authenticity. Although I did hear in some of the chats earlier when we were talking about virtual recruiting that candidates seems to have gotten a little bit more lax these days. We're still seeing some no-shows, but definitely not dressing up as they used to for interviews, not being as prompt. How do you communicate to candidates that this is still a job interview, even if you're taking it from the comfort of your home?
I think this is Julia. I think just kind of, adding to the conversation around job descriptions, I think that in addition to video, which is certainly a great way to humanize your job description, really the language you use can, help express your brand, your employer brand. And if you are, able, and within that job ad itself and the job description, you can really put a lot of different language in, both around your, how inclusive you are as a hiring partner, but also as, you can kind of be, more casual and just be straightforward around what you would expect, and make it clear that you want to help them, you want to help them to be able to do their best and have the best, opportunity for success at getting that job. So I think that, again, along with that transparency, there's just a lot of, there's shifting changes and things aren't as formal as they were before. And we're seeing that a lot. Companies are writing shorter job descriptions that are easier to read. So in addition to using video.
Yeah, I think through that as well, you see, provide more clarity about your application process, really showing them in this digital age, what are the steps in your application process. I think that really helps also to help. And we saw that when COVID hit first, a lot of candidates were, well, I don't apply because probably I will wait for the interview much later, because it's not happening now. And so to be clear that you do everything digital and maybe your last interview will be more face-to-face, it will really help you to that candidates will apply and also take applying for a job more serious.
I'm going to jump on that because I just saw a job ad the other day that came through that spelled out the application process, the interview process right in the job ad. It said, you will be meeting with the following people. And it was like 4 steps. This is the process. You know, obviously you're seeing that you're going up the chain. And so I think that clarity, that transparency is indicating to somebody, we're taking this process very seriously, where we've got it fully figured out, and you're going to be working your way up the management chain. And so I think that that's indicating to the applicant, okay, I've got to get my act together here. And so I can't take this too casually, and I need to be prepared. And so I just thought that was such a great way of spelling it out without like really hitting them over the head with it.
Fantastic. And we're seeing a lot of great comments coming in from what others have found successful as well. They indicate that not only in their job descriptions, but we've also seen in terms of summary emails, in terms of scheduling the interview and what to expect. And going back to an earlier question about tech capabilities, old school methods seem to be working very well in terms of the initial phone call, as well as text and email. So let's not forget about other ways that we can communicate with people. Great. All right. We have more questions that are coming in, trying to get to as many as possible in the time that we have left here. Jewel, this is more for you in terms of the research. Seeing that there is a shift from more full-time employees to people doing more contract, gig labor. Are we seeing, was any of that in the study at all? And if not, do we have an anticipation of approaching that later this year?
We are planning on digging into more of that gig work, temp contract work dynamic in future research. I think what we saw here is the need for flexibility and wanting to work different hours, or it's not just by location, but it's also by the hours you work, and having the ability to work earlier in the morning or later. And so I think that gig work offers those types of opportunities. So they are definitely appealing. And then I think we're also going to be looking at, how people are viewing gig work. Is it a career path for them, or is it in addition to a full-time job they have, or until they are able to find permanent work? So there's a lot of dynamics at play, especially with all that's going on in the pandemic and kind of just shifting the ways of work. So more to come on that.
Great, perfect. Julia, this is going back to an earlier comment that you had made about what companies can incorporate into their EPP as they're looking for qualified candidates. This is not specific around DEI, but that idea around flexibility, and that in some roles, such as retail and manufacturing, they don't have the same options for remote work. So are there any recommendations that you have for other ways that companies can demonstrate that they are flexible, as well as listening to their employees, even if they don't have the same work-life balance as other companies can offer?
Well, I think that's a good point. And if you're a company that, let's say, is in retail or another, you still can offer flexibility, and you can still make that part of your core values that you want to support. Let's say, if you figure out that one of your personas, which is one of the candidates that is your ideal candidate, or, for Home Depot, for instance, one of the personas that they go after is a retired people, because there's a lot of part-time work available at Home Depot, and also people who are, sometimes even people who are, working parents who may want part-time work, right? So I think that if you have identified that, one of the personas that you are looking to attract is, let's say, a working parent, then I think that you can make sure that that comes through in your job description, in the branding that you use, in the images that you choose to convey. You can show that you may be retail and perhaps you can't work from home, but there's flexibility in the scheduling and the hours that you offer, and that's something that you're committed to if you are, trying to expand your talent pool to include, let's say, working parents.
And if I may add to it, it's sometimes also, if you cannot provide that flexibility, it's also about just putting in front of the candidate the excitement about your company and what is your company about. It's not about what if you want to tap into a pool of candidates and you want to be you think flexibility will pull them in, but you are not flexible, then don't say those things, but highlight the things that are really crucial, and what is excitement, what is exciting to work for your company, and just be very clear about those things. I think it's not always about tapping into things that you are not. It's also about what are you about, and come across very clearly on those topics.
Perfect. We have time for one more question. Oh, well, two more questions, because one's just came in. It's actually fairly easy to answer. Can you elaborate on EVP? We're not familiar with that acronym. That's my fault. I should have explained that a little bit more. Julia, you mind jumping in on that one?
Sure. EVP stands for Employer Value Proposition. And again, it's sort of a quick way of thinking about it is it's a bit of a mission statement, but it's essentially what you as an employer are promising to your employees, and it's in exchange for the work that they're going to give you. And then you show that through the benefits, the culture, and then, in terms of actually demonstrating it, it's everything you do across your every way in which a candidate might have a touch point with you, from your career site to your actual corporate website, to advertising, to your job descriptions, to the interview process, all the way through the onboarding, so that whatever you are, promising as a company to your, candidates is felt, like almost like a mission statement.
Exactly. And that mission statement, as Julia said, goes throughout your entire employer branding. Perfect. And then our one last question here, again, not part of the data, but I'm very interested to hear not only our panelists, but please chat us your response too. Now with the rise of remote work, what are your thoughts on employers paying workers by location versus location of where they're working versus the company? Versus example, if the company is in New York City, do you pay a New York City wage, or if the person is living in, say, the Pocono Mountains, how do you address that? I'm seeing some smiles on the panelists, and I would love to hear attendee thoughts as well.
I was smiling because I think it would be interesting to hear how employers are thinking about this. I think there's been some discussion about making these changes and really thinking through how it's going to work. I don't think there's going to be a silver bullet across all companies to solve for it. So I don't have any solutions yet, but I think it'll be really interesting to learn and track how the shifts are made.
Yeah, and to me, I think it comes back to how every employer, I think, is looking at it a bit differently. I think everybody wants to be fair and equal across their employee base, and I think they just have different perspectives on how they sort of manifest that equality. Some will say, actually, everybody who has the same job should earn the same dollars wherever they are, and that's how we represent equality. And others have the perspective that, hey, if you're living in a lower cost area, we want everybody's sort of purchasing power to be the same, and because of that, that's how we look at equality. So I think it's going to be very different based on the different employers.
I think that you raise a good point, Scott, which is also, gender equity and it being sort of legally compliant when you start paying different workers different salaries, regardless of where they live, can be tricky. So I think, but like you said, it depends on the perspective of the employer.
A lot of people are commenting in about how they have come across this as well. Some have said that they should pay where the employer is. To them, it makes no difference if you have to drive to the office. Others say that they have salary ranges anyway, so it doesn't matter where the candidate is located. And others have, of course, raised some concerns about compliance with the states that they're working from. So again, thank you so much. That hour flew by. Thank you so much. That's all the time that we have today. We really appreciate you attending our webinar on our 2021 Outlook. If there are additional questions that we were not able to get to today, we'll review those following this meeting and try to get back to as many as possible. We really appreciate your participation. Such an engaged and active audience, not only in the Q&A, but also in the chat as well. Tomorrow, you'll receive an email with today's recording as well as the full report. So I know we skimmed through that data and you'll have a lot more time to sit through it. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. Our full list of panelists and our hosts are happy to help. And as always, please feel free to reach out to a Monster representative to discuss any of your hiring needs. We're happy to help you find the new fit in the new year. All right, thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.